I'm Jamal, and you're listening to Get In The Mecha, your weekly anime and manga analysis podcast. From inspiring arcs to game-changing cinematography, I'm on a journey to try and make sense of it all, episode by episode. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to Get In The Mecha. In today's episode we are looking at the animation but also direction of a creative that I really like, and that is Naoya Nakayama. So let's get into their work. If I was to summarize Nakayama's work as briefly as possible, or say what it represents, it would really be this notion of if one is to focus so hard on one thing, they eventually master it, and they eventually become almost the best at it. And that is Nakayama pretty much. What has Nakayama necessarily mastered, you ask? And that is the anamorphic aspect ratio, these anamorphic widescreen aspect ratios, aka 21:9, or 235:1, or 2.39:1. They are so effective at both animating within it and also directing for it as well, and I think over time these skills have come, and they've, with all the projects they accept as you go through the list of their work, you notice that they constantly step up their game when they're working on it, since I think that they've really figured out how to use it. However, it isn't just the aspect ratio that they're animating in or working in, but it's really getting good at working at everything that comes all around it and bringing out the maximum potential of it. This is something we already try to speak quite deeply about on the podcast, and how aspect ratios within the 21:9 ratio are really good at kind of creating this impression that space is limited, even though technically it's a wider screen, so it isn't, but it creates the illusion of limitation. But even so, they're able to work within the limitations and bring out things that aspect ratios like 16:9 can't really bring. And yes, that's really Naoya Nakayama. They've really mastered all these things that come with the entire package, rather than just animating within it in a very bog standard way. They've really gone above and beyond. Not to speculate too much, but based on their key animation work, which is very focused on anamorphic widescreen aspect ratios, I suspect that they've become quite informed by it, and that by constantly working on it has allowed them to get to a stage at which they've basically mastered it. It's not to say every single thing they've done in their entire career is done in 21:9, but by constantly working with it and hacking at it, you get to a stage, I think, where you really just get it and understand it's so familiar, basically. Great examples of this would be their work in Kaguyasama, so the famous Chika dance, or the very cinematic moment with Mikoto, and Kaguya and Miyuki, and they're having a whole conversation, all these contrasting lights, and they're in the darkness too. It has such a beautiful look to it. And so how do they achieve this? They achieve this through this amazing color contrast that goes really well with when you're watching this on a screen that's relative to, say, 16:9. You get this amazing contrast between the bars and the screen, and I think that only brings out some of the colors, and the same applies to the Kage episode too. They seem to have picked up on all these very small things that I don't think most consider, so again, the color contrast, but also framing things as well. What works and what doesn't. A really great sort of safe frame that they often go for, but it's very effective, is the center frame and creating symmetry within that. And this really pays off when we look at their direction. So my personal favorite thing that they've directed and done storyboards for, and even done some key animation for, is a Salt Lily Bouquet. I really love how Nakayama takes advantage of these centerpieces, or just simply placing characters in center frame, and this works because when we have a much wider image in a way that really brings out the horizon line, our eyes are kind of drawn to the center because you have the horizon and then you have something in the middle to sort of disrupt the horizon, I think. And so you get this nice mini cross and you usually see what's in the front, or at least that's kind of what I think I'm not saying this is a universal process, but I think that's my process when it comes to watching something in 21 to 9. And Nakiyama really uses that to their advantage to the point to which it just feels like they're so fluent in an aspect ratio. I never knew I was able to really say that, but this is one of the few creators that I genuinely think is what you could say fluent in a technique or a technical part of anime. What can we learn from Nakiyama? Every technical aspect comes with so many intricacies and aspects to consider. I think Nakiyama can be quite an inspirational artist and even just inspirational for us creatives when it comes to focusing on one thing. I think often creatives like to try to do so many things, but there's nothing wrong with being very specific and niche and trying a very specific thing, but doing it really well and getting very good at it. And I think Nakiyama shows us that that works, and hence I find their work quite motivating on the basis of that, but also, again, it's some amazing stuff. In summary, it shows that focusing on specific things can come with some real merits. So that was Minisode 3 from last week. Now let's go to Minisode 4 from this week. I'm Jamal and you're listening to Get In The Mecha, your weekly anime and manga analysis podcast. From inspiring arcs to game-changing cinematography, I'm on a journey to try and make sense of it all, episode by episode. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to Get In The Mecha, and in today's episode we are looking at another creative that really inspires me and that I really like in terms of their work, and this time we are looking at none other than Shingo Yamashita. So let's get into it. As an animator who's famous for, if I'm just to list off some stuff like Tetsuo and Birdie Decode 2, to their very famous and arguably, even though I disagree, I did a whole episode on it, infamous part in Naruto Shippuden, and even going further to Yozakura Quartet Hoshi no Umi and their stuff on Full Metal Alchemist's Sacred Star of Milos. They have a bunch under their belt. They've been doing this for a very long time. You'd really have to work your way into the 2000s if you want to start tracking their work. A lot of the reason why I love their animation so much is that they're always able to offer something fresh. A lot of the time, this quote-unquote fresh thing that I'm talking about is the way in which they distort the forms of their characters. They often have this extra fluidity to them and they feel much more loose. He's really able to do some interesting things. If you go back to the Pain episode in Naruto Shippuden, you'd know exactly what I mean. And even if you just go to stuff like Tetsuo and Birdie Decode as well, and Full Metal Alchemist Sacred Star of Milos is just much more loose, and I find that quite enjoyable, to be honest. But also sometimes it's other things as well. It's like introducing cubic debris, which we did speak about when we were talking about Yutaka Nakamura, but I think Shingo Yamashita often goes for this at very selective times, and it's much more subtle as well. If you're watching Tetsuo and Birdie Decode, literally in the first episode, I managed to spot it, but it's much smaller, and it's also a bit more inconsistent. It's not to the same consistency. When I say consistency, I mean as in the size and how they break off as others, but that is also what makes them an amazing animator and director. They're always able to add their spin on something and it becomes their own rather than it falling into the image of someone else's tool. To some, their animation can look quite unusual, especially when they don't have many restraints, but I can also understand why people love this, and I love this because they're such a big eye-opener to what exactly animation can be, and I'm so grateful for that. I think every so often when you are looking at directors or animators, there's one that comes along that doesn't do things in the conventional way or in things that you can already expect, and those are the creators that I think really change your view of anime and things like that, because they change the meta that existed in your head. What you thought something wasn't what it actually was, or they're able to spin that on its head and it really opens your eyes. And Shingo Yamashita, not just on like Naruto Shippuden, but mostly on Tetsuo Berry Decode and Tetsuo Berry Decode 2, really taught me that. And I think that's why I've decided to even do episodes like this, because I'm just much more interested in what animation can be in all these different styles, and Shingo Yamashita really brought that out for me. Just when you think that Shingo Yamashita can't offer any more, besides completely changing how I view animation, they did. And in this case, they have an amazing portfolio when it comes to their direction, and their directional talent is honestly stunning. Directing one of my favorite, if not my favorite anime of 2020, Pokemon Twilight Wings, alongside, and directing both in 2020 and 2021, Jujutsu Kaisen's first and second openings. These are internet-breaking openings that I don't even need to break down for you guys to really understand what I mean by Yamashita is just really a legend on his own, to be honest. Even if he hasn't animating, though, his style often shines through the things he directs on, not just from a directional aspect, but from an animation aspect too. I find that the key animator choices, but also the animation director choices are very in sync with the things that we've even seen from his own animation work. From the stuff of Nakaya Onsen, famous for the Onsen Shin in opening 1, to Kenichi Kutsuna as well in OP2, who's famous, if I was talking about the biggest thing they're famous for, it's their lightning technique and style of animating that. That fits very much in line with the Yamashita philosophy of just changing things up and distorting things, and I think that fits very well with what Yamashita tries to present to us and what he already does in his animation. They're very effective in embracing these unusual forms, be it through the handling of blood and water and fire, as I said as well, the onsen chin, and there's also a massive knack for detail as well in some places. If you go all the way back to Tetsuo Berry Decode 2, there's a very specific scene where I think Yamashita really reached their, I don't want to say they were in their bag as an animator, but they really everything kind of came full circle there when it comes to detail, but also timings and everything. And so I basically, what I'm trying to say is that Shingo Yamashita isn't the typical creative that you come across in this large anime industry. Yamashita as a director and also an animator has just gone all out across the past decade, and every time they really manage to amaze me by doing things that I didn't think that people would usually do, and just going outside of that. In very cheesy terms, I think that they're just really good at thinking outside of the box, which is very effective for anime and fiction, which is constantly doing that, and having all these things you need to represent that we wouldn't be representing in real life. And thinking outside the box is very necessary when it comes to form and directing and all these things, and Yamashita really taps into that. And finally, Yamashita also teaches us as a director that, similarly to Nakiyama as we said last week, mastering a specific thing can be very handy. They've almost mastered short form, as we spoke about in this episode with openings and ONAs, and they've just really managed to refine the approach, which is, from what I'm seeing, probably one of the best ways to really make a name for yourself in this anime industry, this very competitive one. In summary, Yamashita teaches us that refinement is important, but also going outside of what we consider conventional as well can be amazing for evoking new emotions and portraying things even better than we once thought. Thank you for listening to this episode of Get In The Mecha. That was an episode, or Minisode 4, a look at Shingo Yamashita. As always, for these podcast episodes, I'll leave all the links to their stuff in the comment section description. Follow them on Twitter, that would be great. And also check out their work on Sakaburo as well, because I have loads of amazing stuff there too, as in if you want to watch their work and see how it unfolds and what it actually looks like. If you do enjoy listening to this podcast as of late, it would be very appreciated if you left it a review. If you have an Apple device and you're on iTunes, or you just have access to iTunes or any other app that lets you leave reviews, it helps a lot with the algorithm and really just helps out the show, honestly. So if you could do that, that would really help me out. Thank you. And then if you also want to support more, leave a like on the video, subscribe as well on YouTube, and finally tell a friend about this podcast, especially if they're into, anime directors and other creatives. I quite think that they would enjoy this podcast and these minisodes, because we're always dabbling into that and the creators of the anime industry. So give them a shout and tell them about the podcast if you think they'll enjoy it. So that is it for this week and this episode. Have a great weekend, and I will be back next week to talk about yet another creative that I really enjoy. I have been your host Shmar today, and this has been Get In The Mecha. The music in this production goes as follows: Synthwave by Alex McCulloch, Mandatory Overtime by Joth, and Different by Chasersgaming.